Today, I am thrilled to be sitting here with Sarah Nahm. Sarah is the CEO of Lever, which makes a modern applicant tracking solution. And Sarah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah.
So I thought to get started, rather than asking you about the founding story, I'd really love to hear quickly what is Lever, but why is it important to the world?
Lever's out to reinvent recruiting software. And really that's because the world of employment has changed. I mean, when you think about it, all the things that have, in the past several decades changed how we approach our careers, how we approach work, how, people get connected to opportunities with the advent of professional networking, the rise of culture as a big factor for people and why they choose certain companies to work for. And then I think from the employer's perspective, there's been a rise of really, really interesting issues, whether it's diversity and inclusion or, essentially like the changing nature of work with freelancers or shortened job tenures. All of this is coming together, creating a completely different environment for HR professionals, talent leaders, to think about how they're going to drive a talent strategy. And I think that's really what Lever is trying to do differently. We're trying to elevate recruiting out of the administrative work of yesterday and make it a core part of the strategy for a company. How you're going to grow, how you're going to attract talent. That's actually increasingly how you're going to grow your business. So Lever, in a nutshell, we're delivering a complete suite of products, all dedicated to talent acquisition. Our flagship product, Lever Hire, it's reinventing ATS as a talent CRM that, frankly, your whole company is collaborating in to attract and hire talent. We just last year launched 2 new products, Lever Nurture and Lever Analytics. Lever Nurture is a sourcing automation platform, so helping you go outbound, reach the talent that you want to attract, and get those people excited about opportunities at your company, getting your employees connected to prospective talent. And then Lever Analytics, of course, is a modern best-of-breed reporting suite that also is trying to help organizations actually get more predictable about their talent, really understand talent as a velocity. And I think really all of those 3 products, they're all about helping making recruiting more strategic.
And so when recruiting becomes strategic at these big companies, what does that sort of recruiting machine look like? In the sort of perfect world, what do companies do to sort of build that engine that does recruiting?
Yeah, that's the magic question. How do you build, a next generation high performing recruiting function? Well, I think that this really drives a central kind of conflict in recruiting. I mean, I've worked with thousands of our customers and seen companies go from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. And there's kind of one dilemma that rises no matter what stage of growth you're in. And that's that, year in and year out, the growth goals keep going up. But recruiting as a team, as a function, it actually tends to stay, relatively stable. Of course, you may add heads or you may get more resourcing, but not nearly at the same pace that your growth goals increase. So, ultimately, what is a high-performing recruiting function? That's a recruiting team that actually addresses the fundamental problem here, that recruiting never scales as quickly as companies do. And so if you're going to actually keep pace with the growth of your organization, you need to be essentially driving talent as a function that every single person in your company is collaborating on. So what it makes the best recruiting teams, they're ones that drive collaborative recruiting and engage their entire company in a culture of talent acquisition.
And what are the things that enable a recruiting team to scale its effectiveness with the company without scaling headcount at the same rate? So, I imagine possible things could be technology, but what are the things that go into making that possible?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long laundry list of tactical things, but I actually think the most important one is philosophical. I think recruiting is often viewed as like a service function, but today's talent leaders need to start kind of waking up, realizing that they actually have to step up and demand a seat at the table and essentially be a leader of the entire company. They have to have incredibly strong partnerships to the rest of the business. They need to know, the board level strategy just as well as the C-suite. And I think really the people that do this well, and I'm thinking of a lot of Lever customers, teams at Netflix, at Palantir, really I think like best of breed talent organizations, these are ones that, wake up and recognize that recruiting needs to be probably like a very present leader from the moment that someone comes on board. Folded into your onboarding process, you're hearing about how important talent is. You're getting trained on how to interview, what a great referral looks like, and you're really investing in and maintaining tight relationships to the distributed managers. That really is more important than anything else long term. But then tactically, there's a whole host of things that can make a recruiting function more successful. I think one is go beyond applicants. Today's companies are seeing so much more exciting and high quality talent come in from atypical channels. That is, of course, referrals. Referrals are the most efficient channel to hire, but of course, they don't scale as much. And so we see a lot of talent functions going outbound. Essentially building up sourcing team, research teams, encouraging managers to be reaching out to people in their networks. And really, I think building up a strong sourcing function is how we see lever customers succeeding the most. For our customers, 1 in every 3 hires is proactively sourced. So it just goes to show where are people finding results and hiring the top tier talent. It's not by waiting for the perfect applicant to walk up to your door, because the best people never apply. It's actually building up the ability to take kind of your funnel into your own hands and reach out to prospective talent, nurture talent pools, and actually have that pre-engaged talent pool so that when you do have headcount open up or when you really need that role, you've already got people that are familiar with your company, with your story, with your vision, who already have relationships into your company, and who it may be the right time for them to actually sit down, take a coffee date, take an interview, think about their next move.
So now I'm imagining these companies, like you mentioned, Netflix or Google or Facebook, maybe, that have these very sophisticated recruiting processes and these teams with lots of technology. One of the questions I always wonder is, how does a startup of, say, 50, 100, whatever size people, how does a startup like that compete with these companies in a world where they've staffed up, they've become incredibly sophisticated, they've got all the resources in the world? How does a mid-sized company compete with this today?
Yeah, this is a fascinating challenge for organizations of all shapes and sizes because, unlike your core business where you kind of know your competitors, you're competing with everybody. And actually, of course, the large companies, they have the edge on resources, but they may not actually have the edge because small companies have the edge on speed, making a candidate experience really personal, making your recruiting process have your culture at the forefront. So actually, I get just as many questions from large companies saying, how can we compete with these smaller, more agile startups that can deliver just such a high caliber on candidate experience? So I think the answer on both fronts, no matter what stage of company you are, is just to realize, what are your strengths and how do you make that, what you lead with in your recruiting process? And it all comes back to candidate experience. So, if you're a small company, realize that you can offer a really unique opportunity to somebody. They can be part of the ground floor. They can actually be part of building something. They can have a really unique experience from a team and a culture perspective. They can contribute far beyond their role. And at a large organization, it's impact. You can demonstrate to people just how much, on day one, you can be reaching millions of users. You can be plugged into a mentorship network, career ladder opportunities from day one. I think everybody needs to really master, that question of why should someone take an opportunity here? If I were in their shoes, what really is the, kind of compelling reason to choose this opportunity over others? And here's the thing that a lot of people never do, but is incredibly powerful if you can unlock it. You really have to take that story and transmit it to every person in your organization. This is collaborative recruiting in the day-to-day, is actually taking the time to sit down with your hiring managers, with your interviewers, and have them ready to tell that story to candidates. And if you've done that, then a candidate coming in for their interviews, they're actually hearing this incredibly compelling picture get painted for them, and they're hearing it from everybody that they talk to. And essentially that's when a candidate at the end of a day of interviews walks away saying, wow, this is a place that knows their culture, that values, candidates and employees. This is a place where I can really grow and learn. So I think actually, again, don't just stop at knowing the answer yourself as a recruiter or as a talent leader. Take the next step and empower your organization to be part of talent. And welcome them to the strategy, invite them to being a part of it. And you'd be surprised actually at how managers, interviewers, employees, people who just, of course, went through that amazing candidate experience, they're super receptive. They really want to help. They want to build a great team around them. They want to come in every single day looking around at the people that are on their team and saying, this is why I get up in the morning.
Definitely. And one of the things that I think you got exactly right in my experience is that culture is something that is so special at a lot of these smaller companies. One of the things that people often talk about in recruiting when it comes to culture is how can we screen candidates for culture? I'm actually also interested in the reverse, which is how can you communicate your culture to the candidate to sell them? Like, what are the things that companies can do to not just tell the candidate that we've got a great culture, but to show that to them in the right way?
Yeah. Recruiting for culture is an incredibly controversial topic internally at Lever, both in how we think about our own recruiting, and we think about recruiting a lot. I think it comes with the territory being a recruiting software company,
Right.
but in particular our product team, when we think about the decisions that we can make in building out a platform that helps thousands of companies run their recruiting. What really is the best way to think about recruiting for culture? Because there are pitfalls. I think nowadays, with the rise of diversity and inclusion as topics for HR leaders, recruiting for culture is pointed at as one of the biggest pitfalls that you can fall into, because culture tends to be self-propagating. If you have, a certain culture, if you're relying on people to evaluate against that existing culture, you're naturally, selecting for a certain type of people, and then that selection bias continues. So culture can be a real obstacle to building diversity within your team. It can also introduce a lot of blind spots, unconscious bias even, where certain type of people of modes of approaching work are reinforced.
And what is unconscious bias? Like how does that factor in?
Yeah, unconscious bias in a nutshell, it's when you're making decisions about your culture essentially without necessarily making that intentionally. So I think unconscious bias, it's when people can't quite put their finger on why something's important or why it's relevant to your company, and instead act on it without it being something that you as a group of people are choosing with explicit intention. It's actually not a bad thing to have things that you want in your culture or out of your culture. You should be including and excluding things because that's, I think, what makes strong workplaces. But you have to kind of decide and talk about it as a group. You're going to naturally figure out who you are, and hopefully who you are and what you value and what you reward, they're not things that, I guess are sort of things that people can't choose about themselves. Like, I think a lot of the criticism on unconscious bias is that people latch on to things that, aren't chosen by somebody, their gender, their race, maybe their background, whether they've had privilege in the early part of their careers. And they use those as heuristics for success, as opposed to actually talking about, what are we choosing to be inclusive and exclusive about? I think great things to be exclusive about is, why people, how they channel their passions, or how they communicate internally, or how they want to run an R&D process, or what their approaches to, a go-to-market strategy or product roadmap development are. You want to actually have things that you're very clear about, no, this is who we are and this is who we're not. But hopefully those aren't things that, people don't get to choose about themselves. So, I think that advice that I give to people on hiring for culture, because I think hopefully this establishes that it's a good thing if you do it right, is instead of asking, is this person a culture fit? Ask, are they a cultural contributor? What are they going to add to our culture? And that actually can be a really provocative question for your hiring managers and your interviewers. It makes them get really specific about articulating, what they're looking for in terms of culture value add. It can spark all these fascinating conversations about assumptions that people may be having about their culture. And it gets managers and executives in particular thinking about, where does the culture need to go? Because culture evolves with scale. The culture you have at 20 employees doesn't work at 200 employees, doesn't work at 2,000 employees. And great HR leaders cultivate that discussion, that evolution, that foresight on where the culture needs to head. And the talent you hire in can actually be some of the most impactful ways that you actively evolve that culture. A dynamic 10x person who's a great cultural contributor and helps a team get from here to there. That's what everybody's looking for. So, I think in that standpoint, the best talent leaders out there, they're thinking about cultural contribution more so than cultural fit.
I love that.
Yeah, and we at Lever, a lot of people ask us, how do you technologize that? How do you get people to have really good judgment on culture? Well, one thing we do on our platform that I think anybody can choose to do is we actually don't we discourage people from having culture fit as a disposition reason. Instead, our team, our customer success folks working with customers on their implementations, we say, go deeper. Define that. Instead of culture fit, like what does that really mean? What are the attributes that you're looking for? And so, what's a really simple thing you can do? Ban culture fit as a reason you disposition candidates and get more specific.
So how did you build sort of a diverse workplace here? When did you start thinking about that? How did you go about it? Like what took you from when you started the company to the sort of diverse workplace that you have now?
Great question. Diversity has been such a big part of Lever's journey. For 2 years, I was the only woman at Lever. And to get from there to where we are today, we've reached a 50-50 gender ratio. We're 43% women in technical roles, 53% women in management and leadership, 40% women on our board, actually. We are now moving beyond gender into, talking about richer aspects of diversity and, more importantly, inclusion, how we actually make the culture that we have a great place for retaining diversity by making sure that the way that we're evolving our culture is one that's inclusive in all the right ways. So it hasn't always been the case. We didn't get to where we are effortlessly. I think, summing up the journey to date, we started early, which I would definitely recommend to everybody. We were probably the only, 10-person startup at the time that we were, getting off the ground that had a regular diversity and inclusion task force, which was pretty much the whole company. We experimented a lot. I think we relentlessly tried to challenge our own assumptions about diversity. We invited lots of people in the company to contribute to it. I'll be the first to say that founders and the C-suite at Lever, I think made less of an impact than some employees that really stepped up to the plate. And then I think the third thing that we did that was really huge was we got really specific about what diversity goals we wanted to tackle for ourselves. The media around diversity, the conversation that's happening publicly, it can sometimes be really overwhelming. And, I always tell, people that are looking to get started on something specific and something that means something to your company, which could be different. It may not be gender, it may not be race, it may be, sexual identity, it may be just actually, communication or work style. So by setting really specific goals and explicitly prioritizing something and explicitly deprioritizing something, then all the sort of ways that teams already know how to solve problems start kicking in. So break it down, get to a goal that's really specific to your organization. In our particular case, it ended up being women, and we actually started with women on our engineering team. And that led to a whole host of goals, strategies, things that naturally shook out that let us start acting on it. And I think that sometimes companies need that clarity, and HR leaders can be huge accelerators in driving tangible, actionable next steps in diversity.
One of the things I think I've heard consistently from you in this conversation is, to the extent possible, try to convert these gut feelings into a tangible conversation where everybody agrees and turns those kind of impulses into something that's tangible. And so when I look at what you've done, you basically, it sounds to me as though you said, there's a lot of different types of diversity, but we chose to focus on women first. And I assume that you also think about other types. But I would love to dig more deeply into how you actually did that, because I know that gender is one of the ones that people care the most about, and it's very important. And so, particularly in engineering, how can companies find how should companies go about finding candidates to, if they want to have 50% women on their engineering team, what are the tangible steps that companies can take to start working towards that goal?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the magic of being a true leader in an HR role. You have to take these abstractions, things like culture and motivation and performance and engagement, and convert them, translate them into actual roadmaps, initiatives, results. And so, I actually think that first and foremost, HR leaders need to be reminded that they're amazing at that. That's what they do every single day. That's what they come in and tease out of the fabric of an organization in every initiative that they do. So step one, keep doing it. But yeah, I think step two, it's about reminding everybody in the organization that that if you tackle something and nail it, something small, then the momentum that you get, the buy-in from the rest of the company, the proof points that you could bring to other functions or other leaders within the company, it's this kind of snowball effect. So I think tactically, the first thing you should do is, go easy on yourself. Find one person, one manager, one small team that cares already about something and work with them. Get, one small goal, one initiative, something off the ground and get results. Use those results to go shop around to other people in the organization and show them how you built out this proof point, how this went really well for somebody else, and expand it. So I think, what does that mean? It means instead of considering this to be this gigantic initiative, something that's company-wide, something that has to be perfect on day one, give yourself the license to work with people that already care and get that snowball effect going. So in the example of Lever and how we got to 43% women on our technical and engineering teams, the story really started with there was already an organic movement there. And so, that was really obviously the first place we should start on diversity, because there were people passionate about it. There were people who wanted to invest time in it. It really was about acknowledging that, validating that, and giving those people license to actually, yes, this is important to Lever and we're going to spend time accelerating this. From there, we actually first started by setting a really, really concrete goal, which was, let's get to two women on our R&D team. Which, I think part of that was the recognition that it's lonely being the only one. And this is actually a practice that we use even at the scale Lever is today. On any little function, on any little team, or on any new definition of diversity, let's get to two. Because then, there's not this spotlight on you being this poster child of diversity. You're actually now a team. So we started with that goal, and once we achieved that goal, we set new goals. Then it became can we actually make sure that all of our job descriptions, all of our job postings, we actually ran a pass on them to make sure they were as inclusive as we wanted them to be. And so the topic started shifting from diversity as people and percentages to an inclusive engineering culture. And there were a whole number of projects and initiatives that went from there to essentially taking that engineering team focus and expanding it to other teams. Actually, our sales team was a really, really big area for us to think about diversity. We had actually gotten to the point where, compared to our eng team, that was the one we saw the biggest gender discrepancy. So then translating engineering to sales, and then I think obviously you can see where we're at today, where nowadays diversity and inclusion is a big part of our culture. It's why candidates come to Lever. It's why employees stay at Lever. It's a huge part of the culture that people are now really passionate about. And it really started with just, let's just get the people that are already passionate about it activated.
That's great advice. And I'd love just, a couple more thoughts on, what are those advantages? Because I think so often companies chalk diversity and inclusion up into one of the areas of we're supposed to do it. How can companies realize that it's really important to their business to do it as well?
Yeah. Well, when I go and talk to our employees, a mix of, give me feedback, what can we be doing more on diversity and inclusion? And then also, what impact has it really had? The stories that come back are pretty astounding. And we've definitely seen at Lever that the productivity gains, the employee engagement, and the retention that we're seeing because of investing in inclusion in our workplace and in our culture, it's one of probably the most profound and impactful things we've ever done from like an HR program standpoint. The kinds of things that we hear from people is, by being able to bring my whole self to work, I can focus on what really matters. Because Lever is a place where, my work style, my communication style, we do a lot of investment in explaining that there's no right or wrong answer, that the way we run meetings, the way that we make decisions, it has to be supported by an inclusive framework. We're allowing a lot more skills to actually come out in the open, a lot more talents to be surfaced. We're not, the type of company where the loudest voice in the meeting is the one that has the most sway. And I think that's led for a lot more types of decision-making, of judgment to surface, and so our decisions get better. I see this a lot on my executive team, where, no matter what happens in a fast-growing startup, a lot of stuff happens. I can always rely on the fact that the diversity of even just like problem-solving approaches helps us service what is an increasingly diverse and heterogeneous team that depends on us. And so to that extent, what is the impact of diversity ultimately? I think you're building up in the short term the ability for people to focus on work and productivity. And in the long term, you're building up a capacity for resilience and smarter decision making. And as a CEO, I can now count on this organization to react and adjust to whatever problems may come our way, because we aren't just reinforcing one mode of decision-making, one mode of operating, one mode of seeing the world. And so we're serving our customers better. We're being more nuanced in the way that we think about our competitive landscape. We're, I think, folding in a lot more types of, like strategies and experimenting a lot more. So you see a lot of studies that are published about, quantifying, the improvements that diversity can bring to decision making. And I can say firsthand that we see it every single day in every part of the business.
That makes total sense to me. The one last question I'd love to ask you is, what is something that you know now, now that you've been running Lever for years? What's something that you wish you knew at the beginning that you didn't?
I think one thing that's super clear after a few years is you really can't overinvest in people, and I think specifically in onboarding. So, like any other company, when we first got started, people would join and they just kind of tumble into the day-to-day. Actually, at Lever, we've seen incredible results come from truly investing in the onboarding experience a candidate has. Some people call it the first 90 days. I think it starts the moment they sign their offer. Now we have a whole host of practices that are just about welcoming that person into not just the work, not just the team, but really the culture and the history of the company. So the moment you sign your offer, our team creates a GIF. Like we get, a webcam, we get the whole team together and we make a welcome message in a GIF form for every single person that signs their offer and send it to them. And everybody in the company piles onto that email thread to welcome them before they're even here. When they start their whole first week, we onboard in classes. So they're part of a cohort of people that are all starting Lever at the same time across all the different functions of the company. And they go through what we call Ramp Camp, which is, a whole week-long training course that not just onboards you to your function, like not just sales or not just service and support, but actually the full 360 of what's going on and how every part of the business contributes to what we're doing. And then, after that, we actually give people kind of an invitation to get started, to have an impact right away. We give them a starter project, something that they can't do on their own, something that they have to go and set meetings with people, ask questions, learn more, do research, excavate, so to speak, the institutional knowledge here, so that we break down those barriers of can I ask for help? Can I ask questions? So I think what's one thing that I've really learned, it's that you can't overinvest in people. That, not just the first 90 days, but the first minutes of somebody being part of your team are opportunities for you to get them excited, to get them motivated, to get them inspired. And so I think that's something that, even today we're constantly thinking, how can we do more? How can we innovate more on that. And it's something that, anybody that's getting started on today, think about what, the experience of a new hire, like what is your aspirations there? What could that be? And challenge yourself to exceed those expectations.
It's great advice, all about the people. Sarah, thank you so much for doing this with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.